My fellow Americans,
You might be wondering, why in the world is there a 30-minute countdown before the show starts? Well, we actually start live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, so this whole 30-minute countdown is a chance for YouTube and Rumble to send out their alerts and notifications, so we encourage you to gather up and hang out with everyone in the chat room. So every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time is when we do this show live. You can join us for the countdown if you like, or just set your clock and reminder that at 4 p.m. Eastern is when we go live. You can also make sure you subscribe and turn on that bell notification, so hopefully you will get a notification.
What do you have to say about dictators of countries like Indonesia, who we sell weapons to, yet they are slaughtering people in East Timor? What do you have to say about Israel, who is slaughtering Palestinians, who impose martial law? What do you have to say about that? Those are our allies. Why do we sell weapons to these countries? Why do we support them? Why do we bomb Iraq when it commits similar problems?
There are various examples of things that are not right in this world, and the United States is trying. I really am surprised that people feel that it is necessary to defend the rights of Saddam Hussein, when what we ought to be thinking about is how to make sure that he does not use weapons of mass destruction.
I'd like to...
Who are shouting, just a moment.
I'm not defending them in the least. What I am saying is that there needs to be consistent application of U.S. foreign policy. We cannot support people who are committing the same violations because they are political allies. That is not acceptable. We cannot violate UN resolutions when it is convenient to us. You're not answering my question, Madam Albright.
You briefed the press, did you not, when you were there?
Well, I had several jobs. One of my jobs was that of analyst. I also was an interrogator and indeed briefed the press when we, the CIA, wanted to circulate disinformation on a particular issue. Disinformation is not necessarily a lie. It may be a half-truth. And we would pick out a journalist. I would go do the briefing and hope that he would put the information in print.
What was your percentage of success?
We were pretty successful in planning information of a rather rarefied nature. For instance, if we wanted to get across to the American public that the North Vietnamese were building up their force structure in South Vietnam, I would go to a journalist and advise him that in the past 6 months, X number of North Vietnamese forces had come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail system through southern Laos. Now, there is no way a journalist can check that information. That's data derived from radio intercepts, spy in the sky photography. So either he goes with the information or he doesn't, and ordinarily or usually the journalist would go with it because it looked like some kind of exclusive. Go after these gentlemen. I would be directed to cultivate them, to spend time with them at the Caravel Hotel or the Continental Hotel, to socialize with them, and slowly but surely to try to gain their confidence by dolloping out valid information which was true. And then I would drop into a conversation the data that we wanted to get across which might not be true. One piece of data, for instance, that we managed to plant in the New Yorker magazine had to do with a supposed North Vietnamese effort in 1973 to develop airfields along the border of South Vietnam. The reason we wanted to plant this information was that we were trying to persuade the U.S. Congress that Saigon should continue to get a great deal of aid, and that the North Vietnamese were the chief violators of the ceasefire accord. That was printed in the New Yorker magazine under the byline of Robert Chaplin, as indeed was a great deal of such information which we tried to circulate.
Frank, a two-part question. What were the objectives of or what was the objective of the CIA? What about the moral implications of what you were doing in feeding this information? Did the objective override the moral implications, moral problems?
Well, the objective of the agency in general is to generate intelligence and get it back to Washington, to get at the truth and make sure the policymakers understand it. When you plant disinformation, you are diverging from that objective, and I think probably in retrospect it was very counterproductive. I am, as an ex-CIA agent, opposed to the disinformation activities in which I was involved. I admit that I was involved, and I think it served no useful purpose. Propagandizing the American public or Congress is not the CIA's job. As to the morality of what the CIA was doing or that particular activity, the war was a very relative thing. It was a relativist environment, and morality seldom came into play when you were operating in the field. In my estimation, a CIA man should be amoral. That may sound pretty shocking to somebody, but what if my morality were that of a Nazi or agent, if you will? You wouldn't want me to be your intelligence officer. Keep the morals out of intelligence. Keep the truth in, and stay away from disinformation.
It would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
Colleagues, but the answer to war is not more war, it's peace. And peace isn't delivered by the barrel of a gun, it's delivered by diplomacy, by dialogue. You can wish away your continent's history, but we share a continent with Russia. We will sit down with Russia. There will be a negotiated peace, and this organization should be promoting it earlier rather than delaying it and making sure that more Ukrainians die. Your feigning of sympathy rings hollow. It makes me sick, to be honest with you.
become involved when disinformation poses a threat to the security of our country. It is when there's a connectivity to a threat to our country. It could be a threat, a connectivity to violence. And what this working group does, is precisely what I would think you would want it to do, which is to take a look at the work, the disinformation work that our department has done and ask the following questions. Do we have policies? Do we have guardrails? Do we have standards?
But here's the problem. We can't even agree. We can't even agree what disinformation is. You can't even agree that it was disinformation, that the Russians fed information to the Steele dossiers. You can't agree to that. How are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media?
Senator, I have 2 points, if I may finish. Number one, that what this working group does, because it's not an office, what this working group does is ensure that there are guardrails, definitions, standards to make sure that the free speech rights, the civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights of individuals.
So do you think COVID disinformation threatens our national security?
And number two, if I may, Senator, and number two, is it your proposition that when the cartels spread disinformation with respect to our immigration policies to try to lure vulnerable migrants to our border illegally?
I think you've got no idea what disinformation is, and I don't think the government's capable of it. Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want you guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think we can't determine, speech by traffickers is disinformation? You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
Hey everyone, just as a reminder, our show starts at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, just a few minutes from now, but I should remind you that we have a daily newsletter. It's totally free. Natalie and I work very hard on it every morning over our cup of coffee, putting the stories together that we think are important that the mainstream media is going to ignore. All you need to do is go to our website. It's just redacted.inc. Put in your email address. We won't ever sell your email to anybody. And then you'll receive a welcome email. And all you need to do is verify that email, and 7 a.m. Eastern Time is when we send out our daily newsletter. And it's about 5 or 10 minutes in length that you can read it over your cup of coffee. And like I said, we cover 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day, plus a couple of things you might have missed while you were sleeping. We try to have some fun with it, add a little humor into it. And again, it's a great way to start off your morning. But it's also a great way for us to stay connected with you as well, because we've been banned and blocked on some of these platforms before, where we haven't been allowed to post anything, not even a community post. So the only way for us to stay connected with you is through our newsletter. We were able to send out a newsletter and say, hey everyone, we're blocked for the next week, and let you know what was actually going on with our show. Anyway, go to redacted.inc and sign up for the free newsletter, and it'll be posted first thing in the morning over your cup of coffee.
This is a bit of an aside, but in terms of how you think about problem sets, when I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CI director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire We had entire training courses.
We had a good discussion on ensuring global energy security and adequate oil supplies to support global economic growth, and that will begin shortly. I'm doing all I can to increase the supply for the United States of America, which I expect to happen. The Saudis share that urgency, and based on our discussions today, I expect we'll see further steps in the coming weeks.
Are you worried about
One of the hopeful things that I've discovered is that nearly every war that has started in the past 50 years has been a result of media lies. The media could have stopped it if they had searched deep enough. If they hadn't reprinted government propaganda, they could have stopped it. But what does that mean? Well, that means basically populations don't like wars. And populations have to be fooled into wars. Populations don't willingly and with open eyes go into a war. So if we have a good media environment, then we'll also have a peaceful environment.
Killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed a million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war.
George,
after
if
what
I was
you've already
still in
done.
Parliament, I...
There can be no doubt that Saddam Hussein has biological weapons and the capability to rapidly produce more, many more. And he has the ability to dispense these lethal poisons and diseases in ways that can cause massive death and destruction. If biological weapons seem too terrible to contemplate, chemical weapons are equally chilling. UNMOVIC already laid out much of this, and it is documented for all of us to read in UNSCOM's 1999 report on the subject. If we consider just one category of missing weaponry, 6,500 bombs from the Iran-Iraq war, UNMOVIC says the amount of chemical agent in them would be on the order of 1,000 tons. These quantities of chemical weapons are now unaccounted for. Dr. Blick says, quipped that, quote, mustard gas is not marmalade. You are supposed to know what you did with it. We believe Saddam Hussein knows what he did with it, and he has not come clean to the international community. We have evidence these weapons existed. What we don't have is evidence from Iraq that they have been destroyed or where they are. That is what we are still waiting for.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the president now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the majors. The majors' assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the president have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone. Or to take the nation to war partway. Or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip. Because I think, and that's what I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector, you didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in, so what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Scott, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, they get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon, and one of the generals called me in. He said, sir, you got to come in and talk to me a sec. He says, we've made the decision we're going to war with Iraq. I said, we're going to war with Iraq? Why? He said, I don't know. He said, I guess they don't know what else to do. He said, I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Hey Hey everyone, Clayton here. The show is going to start at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I should remind you that we have a VIP community. It's our Redacted Rebel VIP community. Now, this show is totally free, what you're watching right now, right? You can subscribe here on YouTube and Rumble, totally free. But if you'd like to support independent journalism, we are run by you. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this show. We wouldn't be able to hire the team that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the servers that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the reporters that we have, the team that we have. So you can support us by going to redacted.inc, and on the right side of your screen, you'll see a VIP community button. Just click that, and for the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support us. We put out exclusive content, early interviews that no one else will see, live streams just for our VIP Rebel community. So again, it's totally free to watch this show. But if you do want to support independent journalism, we would really appreciate it. Come on over to redacted.inc, click on that community button, and decide if you want to sign up or not. It's totally up to you. We thank you. And meanwhile, the show will start in just a few moments at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome, everyone, to Redacted on this Thursday. I'm Clayton Morris.
I'm Natali Morris.
And on this show, we cover the stories the mainstream media largely ignores. We are independent, and we love having you guys here joining us live. Thanks so much, and let us know where you're joining us from around the world. We've got a lot of news to get to here on your Thursday. We're going to look at Vladimir Putin rolling out nuclear missiles, moving and mobilizing nuclear mobile missiles around the country, and announcing earlier today the launch of their new Sarmat intercontinental ballistic nuclear missiles. And this all comes, of course, as NATO continues their provocation, moving right up into their border. So we're going to have a special guest to talk about those latest moves.
Plus, we're going to talk about whether or not Tucker Carlson was, in fact, spied on, whether he risked being arrested to just interview a foreign head of state. This is a terrifying story as it relates to our rights as U.S. citizens. Also, we're going to talk about which country is hoarding Bitcoin, as Edward Snowden predicts. This is an interesting piece. And are your teenagers guilty of being righties, conservatives, and toxic? And does that have to do with toxic masculinity? That's what lefties are freaking out about. All of that and more as Redacted starts right now.
All right, we got a busy Thursday, so I don't want to waste any time. I don't want to waste your time on this Thursday. We're going to get right to it today because Colonel Douglas Macgregor is going to join us in moments to talk about these latest developments with NATO, and I think he thinks that NATO is finished. So we're going to talk to him in just moments. But I want to tell you about our newsletter. It's the best newsletter in the world, and you should all be subscribing to it. We had a couple hundred of you join up yesterday and subscribe to the newsletter. Let's get it over 1,000 today. If you've not signed up for our free newsletter, what are you doing? It's our way to stay connected with you because these big tech companies can't control our newsletter. I mean, they try to. Like when you sign up, it might go into your spam folder or your junk folder. Google has labeled us as dangerous. So to Google's mind, it's the most dangerous newsletter in the world. Just go to redacted.inc, put in your email address, and you'll receive a welcome email from me. My name's Clayton. And you'll get that email. You have to confirm that you want the newsletter, though. So look for it in your spam folder, your junk folder, and then click on that, and then you'll receive the newsletter first thing in the morning. We cover about 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day. It's a lot of fun. Sometimes it's kind of hard, some of the stories we cover. Sometimes some of the stories we cover are a little fun. So we try to give it a good mix to kick off your morning over your cup of coffee. It's a great way to start your day. Redacted.inc is the place to go. Again, redacted.inc. Well, NATO continues its provocation of Russia with new long-range weapons to try to be attacked inside of Russia. That is the move. And we heard Jens Stoltenberg last week giving Zelensky the go-ahead, the green light. You know what? Use these long-range weapons to attack inside Russia. How is that going to go? And you'd have to be a fool to think that Putin is just sort of going to sit back and let that unfold on his watch as you attack his sovereign territory. Earlier today, Putin revealed that the new Sarmat intercontinental nuclear missiles have entered service with the Russian army. And over the past few hours, Russia has mobilized a portion of their nuclear missiles onto the streets. It's always interesting when you see nuclear missiles rolling down the street. Colonel Douglas Macgregor posted this on X a few hours ago. Moscow's message: do not escalate and attack Russia. Moscow controls the escalatory ladder, not Washington. We hold a weak hand and are bluffing. In poker, we call it a dead man's hand. Moscow holds a strong hand, and it's not bluffing. We thought we'd ask the colonel himself to go in more detail about this, and Colonel Macgregor joins us now. Nice to see you, Colonel. Welcome.
Good to see you too, Clayton.
Well, you say Russia is not bluffing, and I think a lot of people in the West, it seems like they continue to play this game. Like, how much can we needle him? How much can we surround Russia before it's like a caged bear?
Oh, I think that's right. And you would think at this point they would have figured out after, almost 3 years. It's a big mistake to underestimate the Russians. They're actually quite serious about defending their country, which is what they demonstrated when they went into eastern Ukraine. But I think the important thing to keep in mind with these nuclear missiles is as following. If you try to enter Russian sovereign territory on the ground with any European or American military formations, if you strike us on the ground, anything that is significant, we have the capability to annihilate you, and we will use it. And we will start at the tactical level with tactical nuclear weapons, and we'll work our way up as needed. They're not about to back down and leave Ukraine under any circumstances, and they're certainly not interested in a war. If they were, we'd have been at war with Russia a long time ago. That's obvious. But they're not going to sit there and pretend that they somehow or another are going to be intimidated by us. And we have nothing with which to challenge them. Our ground forces are in ruins. I'm sure you've seen the news with Macron, who stood up and turned himself into the proverbial turd in the punch bowl by suggesting that Europeans should be prepared to march into eastern Ukraine.
Yeah, Napoleon Bonaparte Macron.
Yeah, except Napoleon actually had a real army. Macron has there are 72,000 troops in the British Army. The French Army is a little larger, but these are boutique forces. They're all designed to essentially oppress people that can't defend themselves in North Africa or the Middle East or Africa itself. I mean, they don't have forces that are designed to fight anybody who can fight back.
What do you make of the back and forth then with Macron saying we're not taking this off the table to put ground forces in Ukraine on the part of the French government? Olaf Scholz then having to come out and deliver a video message where he says, under no circumstances, as I, Chancellor of Germany, would put forces into Ukraine. Maybe it is, by the way, I was kind of reading into that. I was really studying his language there because I think you speak German, you understand. The way what he was saying specifically is I, as Chancellor, would not put ground forces into Ukraine of Germany. But he doesn't have the power to do that. The Bundestag does. So he wouldn't be the one that would put ground forces in there anyway. Anyway, I found that interesting, this back and forth between he and Macron. What did you make of that?
Well, strictly speaking, Scholz fancies himself a Bismarckian figure. And the German chancellor, certainly before World War I, was an enormously powerful figure. And he had great authority to do almost anything he wanted given to him by the emperor. So I think there's a certain amount of self-delusion involved with that. But he knows the Germans have no interest in this. Nobody in Europe has an interest in going to war in Ukraine. All of this is a proxy effort. What can we do to weaken Russia? You would think by now the fools would recognize that all they've done is strengthen Russia. Russia is stronger militarily now than it's been since the 1980s. Now they're showing you the latest tactical nuclear weapons, mobile nuclear missiles that can essentially hit any target they need to in Europe. They could vaporize airfields, ports, cities as needed. The other thing is we don't have any air defense. In other words, we talk about air and missile defense, but we really don't have much.
In the United States?
Well, both in the United States and in Europe. We've always depended on our air forces, and the underlying assumption has been that our air forces can penetrate anything and drop bombs with impunity and launch missiles with impunity. That's not really true anymore. The Russians are heavily invested in integrated air defenses, integrated air and missile defenses. They're quite prepared to deal with us if we rely exclusively on the Air Force. And to be blunt, that's all we've got right now.
Ooh, terrifying to think about. We talk about Star Wars of the 1980s. We talk about the Iron Dome in Israel, right? But the United States is sort of a sitting duck here. We can't even handle quote unquote Chinese spy balloons flying over Montana, for crying out loud. We panicked when Balloon Boy was up a number of years ago. Remember that famous story? Yeah. So it's unbelievable to me. I think a lot of people sort of sitting back going about their day-to-day business here, but NATO just keeps going, keeps expanding. Jens Stoltenberg last week telling Zelensky, long-range weapons, we're giving you the green light to attack inside of Russia. NATO membership for Sweden. This is moving right up to their back door. I mean, something has to give here. I mean, we're at this like boiling point moment here, and I don't know what do you think is going to give?
NATO is never so weak as when it appears to be strong. The more talk you hear about unity of effort and larger, more powerful NATO capabilities, the less seriously you should take any of these comments. You've got 32 states today constituting the so-called NATO alliance, getting agreement on much of anything, including, which door do we use in the conference room to get to the bathroom is impossible. There's no unity of thinking or effort at all. The whole sham alliance is designed to create avenues of approach for Europeans to us. It's another channel of communication to try and acquire U.S. favor and support and backing. These are all small countries today. They're much like the Greek city-states in the age of the Roman Empire. We're a sort of declining Rome at this point. I hope Americans will figure that out and act against it, but we're a declining Rome. The European states are like the little Greek city-states that were entirely dependent upon Roman military power to save them from the Macedonians. This whole business is a sham. NATO is probably not going to survive. I wouldn't pay any attention to any of it. I think Scholz knows that if he takes a stupid decision, let's send 3 German brigades, towards Belarus, something like that, he'll be out of office. Not only will his political structure collapse, will the economy tank, but the whole NATO alliance will go out of business.
I want to ask you to put on your political hat for a moment. Of course, you served Donald Trump at the Pentagon, and you see what's happening now in an election year. You see this back and forth fighting over Ukraine aid. Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, saying, look, I'm not giving up this leverage. That seems to me the only leverage they have right now, Republicans have, which is this Ukraine aid to try to get something done at the U.S. southern border. But at the end of the day, Victoria Nuland says, I see Congress passing this money. There's going to be another $60 billion that'll flow to Ukraine. What do you think is going to happen in Washington? Will this aid get passed, moved towards Ukraine?
On one hand, Victoria Nuland is referring to the structure of power in Washington, which is entirely in the hands of the great lobby and lobbies.
Right.
In other words, not just the Israel lobby, the defense lobby, any number of wealthy billionaire oligarchs that have bought up politicians for years. They are ultimately making policy in Washington, D.C. So she's banking on that working. There's a problem with that assumption. And the problem is that everyone in the United States who is an American citizen, I'm talking about Americans, those of us that don't hyphenate our identity, those of us who don't live here part-time or only when the weather's good or something else. We're Americans. We are not interested in what's happening anywhere in the world, but right now, our own country and the southern border. Everyone is watching millions upon millions of people pile into this country. People that we are not only not vetting, but these are people that are supposed to be rapidly repurposed as future voters for the uniparty in Washington, D.C. to provide for permanent government. Americans are waking up. They figured that out. They're watching the criminality. We could sit here and talk for hours about all the crimes committed by these recently arrived so-called migrants. They're just illegal aliens that the administration has decided to let in. And they've got lots of backing from wealthy people. You've got people like the Koch brothers that support this sort of thing for reasons that they have that are exclusively of importance to them. There's no one with any real money or power influencing Washington decision-making in favor of the country. In other words, you, I, and millions of us are really not represented. So we're told, stand around, sit down, don't get excited, and let us overrun your country and create a new majority that will govern you and reduce you effectively to a shameless, mindless consumer. Be part of the sheeple and shut up. And don't worry about the economy. We'll continue to print money. I mean, look at your GDP figures. Everybody says, oh, this is great. Well, a third to half of that's government money anyway.
Right.
People don't seem to get it. You've talked about the economy. That thing is on its way down into the abyss. But until it strikes, people will stand back and they'll wonder and wait. But at some point, things that fall into the abyss eventually reach bottom. And then all hell is going to break loose. But no one today who is going to vote and wants to vote, who cares about the country, gives a damn what's happening in Eastern Europe, or for that matter, in the Middle East. No one's interested in joining these wars. They don't want us to be dragged into these wars. They want things to be made right here at home. And if I were advising President Trump, and I'm sure he has plenty of people telling those, doesn't matter what you say about the other things. What is the top issue for American people? Border security, end to illegal immigration, crush the criminality, expel the illegals. That's what Americans want. Talk about that, you're going to get elected. I think he knows that.
You know Trump very well. If he becomes president again, Clearly, it looks he's going to win the Republican nomination unless something crazy happens with Nikki Haley in the deep state wanting to install her in his stead. But if he becomes the Republican nominee and if he goes on to win the election and you were to advise the president, what would you advise him to do on Ukraine?
Well, as far as Ukraine is concerned, I would immediately announce a suspension of all aid to the Ukrainian regime, to Zelensky. Then privately, through channels, I would let Moscow know that we're interested in settling this issue as quickly as possible. Let us know when and where you want to meet, and we'll help settle this issue. And I would inform all of our NATO allies of the same thing. So that's the way you handle Ukraine. It's not going to happen overnight. I know he says, well, I can stop this in 24 hours. But even if you told the Russians you were going to do that, they'd wait for 2 weeks to see whether or not you did it.
Right.
There's no reason for them to believe us.
Well, they know in the Tucker Carlson interview, they've been lied to multiple times. Promises made by Bill Clinton, promises made by George W. Bush, promises made over and over again that have been broken. So they're going to sit back and wait to see if this is a legitimate move or not. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to watch what Donald Trump does on these big issues, if he's paying attention.
The one thing to remember about President Trump is that every one of his rallies that he attended in 2016, when he was running for election the first time, you had tens of thousands of people chant the same slogan over and over and over again: build the wall, build the wall, build the wall. He was elected, and what did he do? He focused on Obamacare. So my concern is much will depend upon the people who surround him, the people to whom he listens. And I'm not very encouraged by the so-called America First Institute down in Florida and the people that are there, or the usual suspects that go back to the last administration that seem to populate his inner circle. So I just don't know. So for me to say categorically he will do X, Y, and Z is impossible.
Right.
I just don't.
Yeah, I think, that's exactly right. There's so many people surrounding him. The idea of draining the swamp, that was the goal, right? To drain the swamp. It only got larger under Trump. And a lot of people say, well, it was the people surrounding him that insulated the swamp from being drained, kept him from doing it. Is there truth to that?
Absolutely. And if you look at what's happening right now in the Middle East, all sorts of people are saying they're watching every day as hundreds of human beings are being slaughtered in Gaza. Well, some will say, well, they're Arabs. We've been brainwashed to think that Arabs are unworthy of being treated equally with everybody else. I mean, how could that be avoided when you look at the long-term occupation in Iraq and so forth? But the majority of people are not pleased with it. They don't like it, and they know that we're supporting it. So the question is, how do you stop it? It's very simple. The President of the United States tells Mr. Netanyahu, I am withdrawing all support immediately until such time I see evidence that you are changing what you are doing in Gaza. No, he's not going to do that. Never will do that. So it doesn't make any difference what Sullivan or the rest of these people say, or how many times they bring out the crying towel and express concern for the people in Gaza. They're not going to change anything. So that means that sometime over the next 90 days, the only way to change these things is for a major war to break out in the region. And that means that the Arab states that surround Israel are not really capable of taking on and defeating Israel. This is the big myth of what's the existential threat to Israel? Well, it certainly isn't an Arab threat. That leaves you basically with the Turks and the Iranians. The Iranians are not going to attack anyone unless they themselves are attacked. They've made that very clear. But they're also not going to allow Hezbollah to be destroyed. And that appears to be the next target for Mr. Netanyahu. So that opens up another can of worms. And then you have Mr. Erdogan. He's under tremendous pressure at home to do something. And in many ways, he could have a huge impact. He might succeed in diverting the Israelis from what they're doing without necessarily going to war. But he's the one power in the region with 90 million Turks and the largest armed forces in NATO and very capable fighting forces, not the nonsense we see in Western Europe. We're talking about serious army formations full of Turks who will eagerly kill the enemy. That's what he's got. And that should give the Israelis pause. But thus far, Mr. Erdogan has talked a good game, but he hasn't really heavily engaged. So unless something in the region happens, Mr. Netanyahu will continue to do what he's doing. But he's overreaching. There's no question about it. It's only a matter of time. Those who overreach fail. We've seen that in history many, many times. If he goes into Lebanon, he's overreaching.
Well, if he continues this massive slaughter in Rafah, we'll see what the international community does. We'll see what Egypt does to respond, opens their border, allows these individuals to flow into their open-air prison. And we'll see what the United States does. Continues to be basically silent about it and play the game. Well, we've been telling them to go easy on these Palestinians. We've been telling them not to shoot civilians. We've been telling them. We've used strong words. We've been using strong words, but that's about all they're doing. Colonel McGregor, great to see you as always. Thank you so much for your insights, your time. We appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Clayton. Bye-bye.
So to his mind, NATO is finished. This could be the death knell for NATO. I mean, I think this is really interesting to think about what's going to give here. Will it be Putin or will it be NATO? My money is probably that Putin is not going to give up the sovereignty of Russia. That's just an idea. Let us know what you think about that. We've got more news to get to here on your Thursday. We're going to look at the spying on Tucker Carlson. So Tucker just revealed some bombshells about going and meeting with Edward Snowden and Vladimir Putin and what the NSA was doing to him. It's an unbelievable story. And, I know he kind of puts on a front that he's maybe not really pissed off about it. But my God, I would be absolutely furious about it. So we're going to dive into that story in a moment, right after the break. But first, we want to tell you about our friends at Moomoo, because right now, do you find yourself with a substantial amount of cash that's currently just sitting idle, not generating returns? Like you're sitting there waiting, what should I do with this? Should I buy gold? Should I buy silver? Should I buy stocks? What should I do? Well, meanwhile, while that cash is sitting there, it's losing value because the US dollar continues to lose value with inflation. So what you can do is, with our friends at Moomoo, you can actually move it over right now and earn 8.1% API just for opening up a brand new account with Moomoo. That's right. Plus, you get 15 free stocks when you sign up. It's my favorite trading platform. It's my favorite trading app. Whether you're buying ETFs, bonds, stocks, it doesn't matter. That cash is sitting there in the Moomoo account earning 8.1%. That's right. You get 5.1% all day long, but for a limited time, just for 3 months, they're giving you that additional 3% API right now. And all you need to do is use our link, redacted.inc/Moomoo, to sign up. They have powerful tools that other companies normally charge for. Moomoo does not. They give you all of these advanced charting features and all sorts of additional bells and whistles absolutely free when you sign up. So go there, check them out right now. Get 15 free stocks. Park your idle cash on Moomoo for a sweet 5.1 APY plus an additional 3% APY, or earn up to $5,000 in cash rewards when you transfer your assets over to Moomoo. Maybe you got other stocks in another company. Move them over to Moomoo. Get up to $5,000 in cash rewards. Again, redacted.inc/Moomoo is the place to go. Well, Tucker Carlson just dropped some stunning news about the lengths that the United States government has gone to spy on him and stop him from talking to Vladimir Putin and Edward Snowden and more. It's actually amazing. So journalist Tucker Carlson has come forward with some stunning information about his interview with Putin and how the NSA tried to stop it, tried to totally stop it from happening. His lawyers warned him not to do it and to do the interview because they had it on good authority. One of the biggest law firms in the world told Tucker not to do the interview, that they had it on good authority that Tucker would be arrested over sanctions violations for interviewing Putin. Because, it's a country under sanctions right now, sanctions that haven't worked, by the way. He was asked first by Lex Friedman in this, it's like a 3-hour interview. I encourage all of you to watch it because it's wide-ranging. But among the issues I think that matter most to Americans, this piece stood out to me. And we'll link up the interview in the description below our video if you want to watch the full 3-hour interview. It's worth it. Anyway, he was asked first, do you fear for your life? Did you fear for your life? Were you nervous, if you asked tough questions of Putin, would it cause you harm? Listen.
But did you feel like, are there things I shouldn't say?
I mean, how honest do you want me to be? I mean it when I say I felt not one twinge of concern for the 8 days that I was there. Maybe I just didn't. And I feel like I've got a pretty strong gut sense of things. I rely on it. I make all my decisions based on how I feel, my instincts, and I didn't feel it at all. My lawyers before I left, and these are people who work for a big law firm. This is not Bob's law firm. This is one of the biggest law firms in the world. Said, you're going to get arrested if you do this by the U.S. government on sanctions violations. And I said, well, I don't recognize the legitimacy of that actually, because I'm American and I've lived here my whole life. And that's so outrageous that I'm happy to face that risk, because I so reject the premise. Okay. I'm an American. I should be able to talk to anyone I want to. And I plan to exercise that freedom, which I think I was born with. And I gave them this long lecture. They were like, we're just lawyers. But that was, let me put it this way. I don't know how much you dealt with lawyers, but it costs many thousands of dollars to get a conclusion like that. Like they sent a whole bunch of their summer associates or whatever. They put a lot of people on this question, checked a lot of precedent, and they sent me a 10-page memo on it. And their sincere conclusion was, do not do this. And of course it made me mad. So I was lecturing on the phone, and I had another call with the head lawyer, and he said, well, look, a lot will depend on the questions that you ask Putin. Mm-hmm. If you're seen as too nice to him, you could get arrested when you come back. And I was like, you're describing a fascist country, okay? You're saying that the U.S. government will arrest me if I don't ask the questions they want asked? That's what you're saying? Well, we just think based on what's happened that that's possible.
Can you imagine?
And these are people who have his best interest. They're being paid to have his best interest at heart.
Yeah, they're his lawyers.
Right. And he's saying, my best interests are free speech for everybody and free flowing information, and no control of an interview like this. And they're saying, oh no, doing it the government's way is your safest bet.
And we don't know, right? We don't know because we're not in that law firm, but it's the most powerful law firm. I think I know exactly what law firm this is. And they have incredible connections, right? So this isn't just like them just sitting around a boardroom. They're like, yeah, we think you'll be arrested. No. They made phone calls. They're studying precedent. They're really investigating this to present this to Tucker Carlson with a 10-page memo to say, no, you're going to be arrested.
Now, to be fair, a lawyer is paid to worry for your worst case scenario.
True.
So that's what he's asking them is, what is the worst case scenario? And they're saying this, right? But it's not too far out of left field, given we see journalists arrested in the UK for their coverage. We've seen this is not out. It's a non-zero possibility.
Well, and then when you add that into the NSA piece of this, which is the NSA caught spying on Tucker Carlson multiple times now. So he was asked about this and explaining how the NSA had been spying on him years ago when he tried to set up this interview, about 3 years ago, verified that. And now again, a few weeks ago, on his way to Moscow. Listen.
I'm just telling you what happened.
So you were okay being arrested in Moscow?
I didn't think I was
arrested in.
I didn't think for a second. I mean, maybe look. I don't speak Russian. I'd never been there before. Mm-hmm. Everything about the culture was brand new to me. You know, ignorance does protect you, sort of, when you have no freaking idea what's going on. You're not worried about it. Like, this has happened to me many times. There's a principle there that extends throughout life. Mm-hmm. So it's completely possible that I was in grave peril and didn't know it. Because, like, how would I know it? You know, I'm like a bumbling English speaker from California. But I didn't feel it at all.
But the lawyers did.
Yeah, I mean, it scared the crap out of people. You're going to... And look, you have to pay in cash. They don't take credit cards because of sanctions. And you have to go through all these hoops, just procedural hoops, to go to Russia, which I was willing to do because I wanted to interview Putin, because they told me I couldn't. But then there's another fact, which is that I was being surveilled by the U.S. government, intensely surveilled by the U.S. government. And this came out. They admitted it. The NSA admitted it a couple of years ago, that they were up in my Signal account. And then they leaked it to the New York Times. They did that again before I left. And I know that because 2 New York Times reporters, one of whom I actually like a lot, said, oh, you're going, and called other people. Oh, he's going to interview Putin. I hadn't told anybody that. Like anybody. Like my wife, 2 producers, that's it. So they got that from the government. Then I'm over there, and of course I want to see Snowden, who I admire. And so we have a mutual friend, so I got his text and come on over, and Snowden does not want publicity at all. Mm-hmm. And so, but I really wanted to have dinner with him. So we had dinner in my hotel room at the Four Seasons in Moscow. And I tried to convince him, I'd love to do an interview, shoot it on my iPhone. I'd love to take a picture together and put it on the internet because I just want to show support because I think he's been railroaded. He had no interest in living in Russia, no intention of being in Russia. The whole thing is a lie. But anyway, whatever. All this stuff. And he just said, respectfully, I'd rather not anyone know that we met. Great. The only reason I'm telling you this is because, and I didn't tell anybody and I didn't text it to anybody, okay, except him. Semaphore runs this piece saying, reporting information they got from the U.S. intel agencies, leaking against me using my money in my name in a supposedly free country. They run this piece saying I'd met with Snowden, like it was a crime or something. So again, my interest is in the United States and preserving freedoms here, the ones that I grew up with. And if you have a media establishment that acts as an auxiliary of, or acts as employees of the national security state, you don't have a free country.
Do you have a free country? You have the NSA leaking information that they gleaned from his cell phone, leaking it to the New York Times? I mean, how is that?
No, but you see how meta this is we know that this happens because of Edward Snowden. And then it is happening with a meeting about Edward Snowden.
Okay. So what are you saying?
I'm not saying it's okay, but the reason this is not surprising is because of the man he's meeting with, is Edward Snowden.
Yeah, it's just like a healthy serving of irony.
Yes.
Yeah,
with
right,
that,
exactly, on top of it. But of course, it's not like they're sitting there and all of a sudden like their Edward Snowden alert computer goes off, right? I mean, they're watching him ahead of time. So the reason they know about the Edward Snowden meetings is because they've been watching him ahead of time.
And the point I'm making, we could go another round, is that we are not surprised by this because of Edward Snowden.
Right. Yeah. Well, then also he talks about his phone draining. How he first realized it's like, why am I just charged my phone? Why is it suddenly down to 0? Listen to this.
So the NSA was tracking you? Do you think CIA was? Is people still tracking you?
Look, one of the things I did before I went, just because of the business I'm in, all of us are in, and just because we live here, we all have theories about secure communications channels. Like Signal is secure, Telegraph isn't, or WhatsApp is owned by Mark Zuckerberg. You can't trust it. Okay. So I thought, before I go over here, I was getting all this, we're having all these conversations, my producers and I, about this. And I decided, I'm just gonna actually find out like what's really going on. So I talked to 2 people who would know, trust me. And it's all I can say. And I hate to be like, I talk to people who would know, but I can't do there, but I mean it. They would know. And both of them said exactly the same thing, which is, are you joking? Nothing is secure. Everything is monitored all the time. If state actors are involved, I mean, you can keep the, the Malaysian mafia from reading your text, probably. You cannot keep the big intel services from reading your text. It's not possible. Any of them, or listening to your calls. So, and that was the firm conclusion of people who've been involved in it, for a long time, decades, in both cases. So I just thought, you know what? I don't care. I don't care. I'm not sending a ton of naked pictures of myself to anybody.
Not a ton, just a little.
Not a ton. I'm 54, dude. Probably not too many.
Right.
But you see, so I'm like, I'm just, so the guys, I travel with 3 people I work with who I love, who I've been around the world with for many years, and I know them really, really well. And they all got, separate phones, and I'm leaving my other phone back in New York or whatever. And I just decided I don't care, actually. And I resent having no privacy, because privacy is a prerequisite for freedom. But I can't change it. And so I have the same surveilled cell phone. And, I do switch them out because, there it is, because if you have too much spyware on your phone, this is true, it wrecks the battery. And no, I'm serious. It does. And it was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, we went to North Korea, and my phone started acting crazy. And so I talked to someone on the National Security Council who called me about this, somehow knew that your phone is being surveilled by the South Korean government. I was like, I like the South Korean government. Why would they do that? Because they want more information. They thought I was talking to Trump or whatever. So but I could tell because all of a sudden the thing would just drain in like 45 minutes. So that's a downside.
So I guess it's a cautionary tale out there. If your phone suddenly drains to zero, if you're a journalist or you're somebody the government is threatened by, chances are you're being surveilled, I guess, by the intel community. I mean, it's outrageous. It's outrageous that a journalist in the United States going to another country to do an interview like this would be surveilled, and then even more than that, because we know that they're surveilling everyone, but then leaking it on. We know that from Edward Snowden, right? That they're already doing that, but then leaking it to the New York Times. They're mouthpiece of the intelligence state. Like, get right on the phone with the New York Times or the Washington Post. Like I said again, how do you think they got that story, that scoop in Ukraine about the CIA station houses that they went? The CIA called them up and said, come on over here to Ukraine. We're going to give you a tour of our CIA station houses here in Ukraine. It's not a scoop. They're just a mouthpiece of the intelligence state. Let us know your
What's crazy is they can do that to us, to citizens, to journalists, but Assange can't do that to the military. That's not okay, but it's okay for them to just reveal information on private citizens willy-nilly.
No, you can't do that to the Pentagon. You absolutely can't do that to the Pentagon. Or you'll be tried as a traitor on espionage charges, I guess.
It's thin ice, you guys. Thin ice. All right. Well, we're going to continue to talk about Edward Snowden. We're going to talk about him and his predictions for Bitcoin. We're going to talk about Canada's attacks on free speech, because that's the way of the West. And we're going to talk about why liberals are so upset that their teenagers have a conservative bent. Why is that happening? Is that happening? This will be sort of a fun way to wrap up the week here on Redacted. So let's talk about Edward Snowden, because he predicts that some government is buying up Bitcoin on the sly as a replacement for monetary gold. Here was a prediction on X that he made this week. Prediction: a national government will be revealed this year to have been buying Bitcoin, the modern replacement for monetary gold, without having disclosed that fact publicly. Now, why is that a hot topic right now? Because Bitcoin is surging up to its all-time high of around $60,000 per Bitcoin after circling the drain for most of the pandemic. It seems to be back. So we're taking bets now on which country it is. It cannot be El Salvador, because El Salvador is buying it with full disclosure and has been since 2021, when they announced they would accept it as legal tender. Now, El Salvador President Nayib Bukele has been talking about the surge in Bitcoin this week and kind of taking a victory lap. Take a look at this. He says when Bitcoin's market price was low, they wrote literally thousands of articles about our supposed losses. Now that Bitcoin's market price is way up, if we were to sell, we would make over 40%, he says. Profit, yeah. And our main source of Bitcoin is now our citizenship program. He says we won't sell, of course. And he says, remember this next time they spill lies about El Salvador. Now, I want to take a second to talk about Bukele, because I want to say he would be a media darling if he weren't so conservative. He's young, he's well-spoken, he's really handsome. Right, Clayton? I just want to see if you're listening.
Okay.
I don't know if he's really handsome. I just say that sometimes to see if you're listening.
I'm paying attention.
Yeah, he's a handsome dude. Okay. He's handsome enough when you think of the guys that they like put up as a media darling. I would say he's more than Trudeau. If we're talking about, okay, I'm going on a tangent. Anyway,
what about Boris Johnson? You want to go down a laundry list of
he's
media
not
darlings?
a media darling.
Boris Johnson?
No. Not a media darling. The media loves to hate him. Handsome media darlings? I don't know, like Macron.
Okay.
Anyway, okay, I'm sorry. I derailed that. I just wanted to see what your response was to me calling him handsome. Anyway, look at what the Associated Press did with his CPAC attendance lately. They're saying he got a rock star welcome at CPAC. When U.S. investor Peter Schiff responded about this Bitcoin tweet, he says, you better talk about these profits after you sell and realize them. President Bukele says, just cry harder. So he's not having it. He's a bit, I want to say, kind of Trumpy, right? He doesn't suffer fools. He says what he thinks. He's a little bit rogue, right?
I think so.
No,
yeah.
Okay. As an aside, this video went viral this month when he explains how he took El Salvador from the murder capital of the world to one of the safest places in the world, because Europeans and Western governments are saying, You can't do it that way.
We took the recipes from the European Union. We took the recipes from the United States. None of the recipes worked. More bloodshed, more people were dying. So what do? Okay, we do something and we save people. And now we're the safest country in the Western Hemisphere. But suddenly something's bad. Oh, but you shouldn't do that. You should do what I think you should do. Why? Not only we have the right to do what we think is right, and what the Salvadoran people are going to decide whether or not they want this day in free elections, but also we've proven it works. And you haven't proven that your system works in our country. Might work in yours, I don't know. But it doesn't work in ours. It's like I told one time a member of the European Union, I know you Brexited that, but I told a member of the European Union, you take your best government, choose your best government. I don't know what's the best government in Europe, but you choose your best government. Same people, same talent, same experts, same will to do things the right way. You take your best government and you put them to govern Afghanistan and tell them, okay, you govern Afghanistan the same way you govern this European country. You'll be dead in a week. Because you cannot govern Afghanistan like you govern Europe. So stop trying to make us use your recipes because they don't work here. You have your own system. We don't tell you that you shouldn't have a monarchy. I mean, we're fine with your monarchy. We love your monarchy. It's fine. But we don't say, oh, you shouldn't have a monarchy and you shouldn't have hereditary titles. Why? Because it's your country. You can do whatever you want with it. But suddenly we have to do what you want to do with our country.
So,
well, he's absolutely right about that. I mean, if you look at the Arab world, I mean, this is the big grip, where the United States and others want to come in there and tell them how to run their countries. They're not interested in Buffalo Wild Wings. They're not interested in these things that Westerners want. They're not interested in the movie theaters. They're not interested in the things that the United States wants or wants to push on other people, right? I mean, you see the push towards alcohol, right? I mean, the World Economic Forum wants Saudi Arabia to start drinking alcohol, right? Saudi Arabia finally, I think, just opened their first nightclub or something like last week. But it's like, why do you want to push alcohol use into why? Why is that so important? And so these things don't work.
What I want to know is how in the world are we going to spread our democracy around the world with attitudes like that, guys?
Right. Well, specifically what they're saying is, hey, you cleaned up the gang violence in El Salvador, but you did it in an oppressive way that was oppressive to the gangs. And you didn't really take into account socioeconomic status. And it wasn't a woke way you did that. And he's like, who cares? We're safe. We're safer now. So I'm not going to listen to what you have to say. We're going to see a lot more of this guy if he stays healthy, if you know what I mean. Here he is at CPAC. I'm going to bring this back around to the Bitcoin bit, because not only does he say these things about cleaning up crime, but he says these things about U.S. financial systems. And watch him drop these truths, and then let's connect it to whether or not this means that the U.S. may be buying Bitcoin on the sly.
When I talk to my conservative friends right here, they always tell me that the problem is high taxes. But they're wrong. Of course, high taxes are extremely high here in the United States. I give you that. You're right in that. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is not the high taxes themselves, but the fact that they are not even really funding the government. Not even those high taxes, higher than a lot of places in the world, not even those taxes are really funding the government. So who's financing the government? Government is financed by treasury bonds, paper. And who buys the treasury bonds? Mostly the Fed. And how does the Fed buy them? By printing money. But what backing does the Fed have for that money being printed? The treasury bonds themselves. So basically, you finance the government by printing money out of thin air. Someone could ask, well, so if the government can print the limited amounts of money out of thin air, why did they collect taxes? I mean, in theory, it would make sense, right? If they can print unlimited amounts of money, why would they need taxes for? The answer is simple, but it's very shocking. The real problem is that you pay high taxes only to uphold the illusion that you are funding the government, which you are not. It's shocking, but it's true. The government is funded by money printing, paper backed with paper, a bubble that will inevitably burst. The situation is even worse than it seems, because if most Americans and the rest of the world were to become aware of this farce, confidence in your currency would be lost, the dollar would fall, and the Western civilization with it.
So that leads me to wonder, because we know that the US dollar has no foundation, whether or not Bitcoin is being bought up by the United States, as Snowden is talking about. And here's why. I explained this on Twitter yesterday, or X. I'd like it to present it to you now. Did you know that President Eisenhower campaigned with a promise to audit the U.S. gold reserves ounce by ounce? The audit was said to be finished just 7 days after he was inaugurated, but it took them 4 months to publish the report, and it was super fishy. According to the government's own press release, it said all Treasury employees participating in the audit were assigned to activities other than those on which they are regularly employed. That's weird. Why would they not have experts counting the gold? And they never told us how much they actually counted, touched, and weighed. By some estimates, it was as low as 5% of the U.S. stock. Now, experts say that at least 59% of the country's reserves flowed out of Fort Knox in the years since, and we have never been given a straight answer or an accounting. Why is that? And how did we get there? Now, a lot of this comes from this great book, Good as Gold, a fantastic book for a history of how the U.S. citizens were asked to give up their gold, how the United States gave themselves a big raise when they did that, and how then that they sort of pulled the rug out from under the U.S. dollar. I refer you to this. On April 5th, 1933, President Roosevelt, just 1 month in office, outlawed private ownership of all gold. Most in the hands of private hands was gold coins. He said the new decree was in effect a confiscation. Those who didn't comply were subject to as much as 10 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. Now, those turning in gold were paid the official price of it, which was $20.66. But as soon as they turned it in, the government raised the price to $35, basically giving the government a raise. They had something that was worth $20, and then they said it's all of a sudden worth $35. Now, Roosevelt apparently picked that price at random one morning at breakfast. It became this secret figure, and for years to come, millions of gold ounces would be spent in an ultimately unsuccessful attempt to maintain it. He says the American people lost something important when they lost their right to convert paper money into gold at the Treasury. They lost their ability to limit the government's power, to manipulate the purchasing power of their money. They also lost the power to restrain unchecked government spending. And that's where we find ourselves, folks. Isn't it wild to think about how this came down from the presidency and people complied? I feel like today there would be riots if they said you can't own gold. But this was before the Vietnam War. This was when people had more trust in the United States government, and they were like, okay, there must be a reason, I guess.
Well, I mean, you have to remember the military after World War II, after the victory in Europe, the victory in the Pacific, the military, what the United States government told people to do. You know, when there was like military rolled through your town and they told you to go back in your houses, you listened to them. You know, there was an incredible reverence for the United States military and, of course, that patriotism around. And so when they told you to do something, you did it and you listened to it. Yeah, you're right. And so if they told you we need for national security for you to turn in your gold, oh, you know what? That's my national duty. I got to listen to it. I got to go down there and turn in my gold.
And they were exchanged to market value. But then how would you feel if then the next month that $20 gold bar was worth $35?
Right.
Right. They robbed you, basically.
Yeah.
And
well, yeah. And just look at what they did with silver, where I can't remember the guy's name that was doing it, that had he was like basically underwater on silver, so the government got involved, started inflating the price of silver to make that guy his money back, and a bunch of people started investing in it, and then they just dropped the government just stopped, and a bunch of people lost money on silver. But that was like part of the cause of that silver.
The silver squeeze.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
The history of where the rest of that gold went reads like a spy novel. I want to suggest that you read this book because Kennedy also campaigned on getting answers and stopping the outflow of gold. But shortly after he took office, someone pulled him aside and said, shut that rhetoric down right now. And he did. So who got to him? So then again, the relevant question becomes, can the US dollar actually be worth something if the government is furtively investing in Bitcoin? Would that be wrong? Is that why Bitcoin is surging now? Let us know what you think. If that was, in fact, what Snowden was referring to, or another government?
Or is it China? I mean, China, after all, has been secretly buying up as much gold as they can. And this came out. Central banks have been buying up a lot of gold, but China's central bank specifically has been buying up billions of dollars worth of gold. And Russia has been encouraging all of its citizens to go out and buy gold. Putin told his citizenry, go buy gold and silver, go buy precious minerals, because this is the future of the BRICS economies right now built on this. So yeah, who's buying Bitcoin? I don't know. Let us know what you think in the comments below. We've got more news to get to here on your Thursday. We're going to look at how Canada is going after free speech. The Trudeau government is really clamping down on it. It's taking the third stretch here in the third major move on the online harms bill in Canada. So we'll talk about that. Plus, we're going to look at teenage boys. Why are they saying they're giving the big middle finger to wokeness? And I love hearing this. We'll talk about that. But first,
we want to tell you about the wellness company because, of course, the government is lying to you. They always are. I refer you to the segment we just did. And as we know, the government's goal is dependency and control of our lives. Close to 90% of pharmaceuticals in the U.S. are produced outside of the U.S. So what happens when the next global crisis strikes? The price of medications rise, pharmacy shelves will empty, but not if the wellness company can do anything about it. They want your family to be prepared. They make the medical emergency kit that holds 8 life-saving medications that every family should keep in their medicine cabinet, like having a doctor at home. The kit contains antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics, like amoxicillin or a Z-Pak with instructions on safe usage. From tick bites to COVID to extreme bioterror events, every scenario is covered. These prescription emergency kits are in huge demand right now, so head on over to twc.health/redacted and grab one of yours before they're gone. Again, that's twc.health/redacted. Use code redacted. It will save you 10% at checkout. Kits are only available in the USA, but be safe, be prepared, and stay well with the wellness company.
Well, get ready for massive censorship in Canada. The groundwork has been laid over the past few months, a playbook right out of the WEF's handbook. And of course, Justin Trudeau is a stooge of the World Economic Forum, making Klaus Schwab very, very happy. So this week, the online harms bill was introduced in the House of Commons in Canada this week, and it is as bad as you think it is. In fact, our next guest calls it a monstrosity. That is David Clayton, who is an independent journalist from Canada who writes at the Post Millennial and has his own YouTube channel, Clayton's Right. David, you've been watching this from the very beginning. And you've been warning us all over the past year and a half, telling us here on this show just how bad this is. Well, no one stopped it from happening, and now we see it in the House of Commons. So what does this bill purportedly do?
Well, as you said, Clayton, I've been warning people about this censorship bill. It's the third piece of Trudeau's censorship legislation. We had Bill C-11, which was Canadian content, sounded innocuous, but it wasn't. Then we had C-18, which demanded money, extorted money from social media companies if they wanted to put Canadian news stories on their networks. Those two bills have been bad enough because they have been doing nothing except suppressing news. This one, the Online Harms Act, is really insidious. I'll tell you why, because I kept thinking it was going to be called the Online Safety Act. That's what it originally had been called. That's what the UK called it. That's what Australia has called it. That's what the globalist agenda insisted it be called. But they changed the name, and they changed the focus from misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation to hate speech and harmful content.
It's worked in Europe.
And
right? I mean, this is a playbook right out of the European playbook on hate. Now, if you add hate into it, now you get into criminality. Right now, we really have to put our foot down on what you're saying and doing online.
And that's precisely it. I mean, who wants to be in favor of hate speech?
Right.
And who wants to be seen as somehow aiding and abetting hateful people? And that's what this bill is all about. It's very insidious. And it talks about sexual exploitation. It talks about child pornography. It talks about protecting children. And when the Minister of Justice, the Attorney General, who is really a non-entity, came out of nowhere, Virani, who replaced David Lametti in a cabinet shuffle last summer, he's been given total control over this bill. The other two pieces of legislation were passed through the Ministry of Heritage. This is all a Justice Department play right now. And because it's all focused on changing the Criminal Code of Canada, making more unnecessary laws against hate speech. We already have laws against hate speech in Canada. You know that. And this is all about making the pit even deeper for free speech. And so I listened to the minister yesterday. All he wanted to talk about was how this is going to protect children. But you know what? What's scariest about this is it's creating another layer of bureaucracy in Canada called the Digital Safety Commission of Canada, another government department. Yeah, we need that.
Oh, great.
I mean, Trudeau has literally doubled the number of public servants since he's been in office. Now we need another layer of bureaucracy in Canada.
This is the strategy, though. This is what all of these governments are doing. You're seeing it in the United States and the Department of Homeland Security, of course. This has been exposed, the massive layer of censorship and suppression that is orchestrated right out of the Pentagon. So I guess if you compare it to what the United States is doing, how is it different, do you think?
I think it's different because they've had the audacity to create a new office here as well as this commission. It's called the Digital Safety Ombudsperson of Canada. Well, you know what that equates to? That's the online censorship czar. Of course, they don't want to call it that. And it sounds like somebody's going to fairly assess these and adjudicate these issues out there. But what they're doing here is saying, okay, we're not going to make it necessarily illegal if you contravene our categories of harmful content. We're going to get back to you and say, resolve this matter by yourself or else. Then we'll go after you. So censor yourself. This is what is scary about this to me, is that it's not going out there with a naked fist of aggression and saying, we're going to throw you in jail the minute you contravene our legislation. First, they're going to come back to you and say, okay, we caught you. Change what you said. Amend your speech. Stop saying that. And if you don't, we're going to come back and get you. Because the categories of harmful content, it's right in this bill. All you have to do is read it. Nobody's reading it, though, because they're hearing the government say, well, it's all about protecting children and content that sexually victimizes a child. That's what we're trying to stop here.
But wait, didn't that already exist? Like, isn't it already illegal to share pedophilia in stuff and child pornography? Like, isn't that already illegal? Why do you need a new bill that couches it? And I always find this hilarious, right? In the United States, we call it hate, that's a hate crime. Wait, wasn't it already illegal to kill somebody? But now there's an extra layer of hate on top of you. On top of it, it makes no sense. You just add these, this language on top of it. So, yeah, did Canada already have these protections in place?
Yes, of course we did. Of course we had protections against child. We had protections against child pornography, and we had to have protections against hate speech. This will actually create another category in the criminal code, distinctly defining hate speech as a separate crime. So not only is it's not going to be just aggravated if it's motivated by hate. If you say something motivated by hate that's wrong in the government's eyes, you're going to be charged under a separate category. So, and they're going to insist that hatred or harmful content somehow be defined. That's going to be in the broadest context.
Right. Have they tried to define it, or is there any examples of what they say is hate speech?
Well, there's lots of examples of hate speech, but they have never tried to define hatred because, of course, where do you begin and where do you end? I always say that if you read Das Kapital or the Communist Manifesto, there's plenty of that book that can be constituted as hate speech against property owners, hate speech against capitalists, hate speech against people who go to work, as Karl Marx never did. But I don't want those books banned because I consider that to be hateful against an identifiable group. But
Right.
this is what this bill is going after. And it's interesting that if you go through the categories of harmful content, yes, they talk about the sexually victimization and they talk about intimate content communicated without consent, but then you get to what they're really after here. And that's content that foments hatred, content that incites violent extremism or terrorism, and content that incites violence. Therefore, anything I say in support of the Freedom Convoy could be construed as harmful content because the Trudeau government considered the Freedom Convoy to be a violent extremist group. So I've got them right there, that they're going to hang me out to dry for supporting the Freedom Convoy because Trudeau considered them an extremist and violent group. That's what this whole issue was always about with him invoking the Emergencies Act. In fact, Liberal members of Parliament actually called them terrorists.
Right.
So any content that I put out or independent journalists put out or new media or even mainstream media that is in any way fomenting support of that can be constituted as harmful content. In fact, even hate speech.
Well, you know, this is a playbook, right? I mean, this is again a page right out of the playbook on how you suppress this type of content, because then they can go to the large big tech companies and they can say to YouTube and Google and so forth, their guidelines in Canada now must support and now must protect against this type of content. And it gives then those countries the power to be able to do that and censor. And these big tech companies have to throw up their hands. And they say, you know what? We're just in alignment with Germany. We're just in alignment with France on this policy. We're just in alignment with Canada on this policy. And Google and YouTube can just throw their hands up about it when this type of content gets banished and suppressed, blocked, and maybe even then facing fines or jail time as a result of it.
Yes, and as you said at the beginning of this conversation, this is a globalist agenda. It's happening all over the world, throughout Europe, and particularly in the English-speaking democracies that used to be the bulwark against authoritarianism. If this can happen in Canada, this can happen anywhere. And of course, it has happened already throughout Europe. And there are actors in the United States who want the same kind of legislation there. And if it doesn't happen under Joe Biden, hopefully it won't happen under any successor. But this is dangerous because it's demanding self-censorship. It's putting a chill out there, saying,
so what does that mean?
You better abide.
You better do it. You better do it yourself. You better censor yourself. And if you don't, then we'll come after you. So you'll receive some sort of a slap on the wrist from the government, and you now need to censor yourself. You're going to have a whole just nation of sheep walking around.
Well, and isn't that the essence of a totalitarian regime, Clayton, where people self-censor themselves all the time? If you talk to people who went through Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia, that's how their lives were led. They used to say the only time they could speak their minds was in bed at night, because that's the only time they really felt nobody was listening. And this is what this legislation is all about, is that we tell ourselves, oh, I can't say that. I could be going to jail, or I could have the police at my door, or I could have a letter in the mail saying you're going to have to appear before a commission or a human rights tribunal, or have a trial, a criminal trial. So I guess I'll just not say it. I guess I just won't criticize the Liberal government today. Maybe next week, maybe next month. And that totalitarian, authoritarian trend becomes ingrained in the systems, in the DNA of a population. And that's what this is all about. It's making people start to think like they live in a totalitarian regime, not just react to the laws, but be compliant. and insist that people start behaving. And that's what I hate most about this. Well, I shouldn't have said hate.
You shouldn't have said it. Justin Trudeau, though, this week said something I hated, which he called out. He said, the world we're starting to see the rise, the growth of authoritarianism and totalitarianism and dictatorships. And I couldn't believe that he said this with a straight face. Listen.
But I will say that in all of our democracies, in every democracy around the world, we are seeing a rising movements of either authoritarian populism or skepticism about democracy itself. And we all need to recommit ourselves to standing up, not just for Ukraine, but through standing up for Ukraine, to the very principles that make our countries strong and free.
So Justin Trudeau says these comments he says them with a straight face, as if he doesn't realize what's happening in his own country being led by him to clamp down on freedoms, the authoritarianism that he is presiding over in Canada.
Well, he's the ultimate narcissistic politician, and he's just so politically dense. He's so politically fatuous at times. There he is calling Vladimir Putin a coward because he said he used the police to suppress a political opponent, which actually is nonsense, as your wife Natalie pointed out recently. But who's the coward? Who's the one that used the full force of the state and the police against his political opponents? That was Justin Trudeau, who had the police physically beat up Freedom Convoy protesters as I stood there reporting on it, as I stood there watching. Police physically abused Freedom Convoy people while Justin Trudeau wasn't even in town to watch. So who's the coward?
Yeah, well said. He was like hiding in a cabin somewhere. No one could find Justin Trudeau. Well, we'll get you out of here on this, David. Where does this go from here in the House of Commons? What is the next step?
I wish I could be more optimistic. I believe Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives will oppose this because, as Poilievre has said on many occasions, how do you define hate speech in Canada? It's anything that Justin Trudeau hates. So he's not being fooled by the hate speech label on this legislation. The problem is that the New Democratic Party, the socialists, are continuing to prop up the Liberals. They just got their latest concession. More pharmacare legislation is on its way for the NDP. They're going to continue to support this government. And without the NDP relinquishing that control, I believe this legislation could pass before the next election. Now, that would be catastrophic. It would have to be repealed by the Conservative government that will probably, in all probability, follow the defeat of the Trudeau Liberals. But in the meantime, we could be at the mercy of this authoritarian, dictatorial Trudeau regime.
David Clayton, up in Canada, thank you so much for joining us as always. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Clayton.
All right. Thanks so much, David. We really appreciate it. I should mention here, they just discovered in the bill also has this, we should have mentioned this, but ran out of time, the new standalone hate crime offense that would apply to every offense in the criminal code and in any other act of parliament, allowing penalties up to life imprisonment to denounce and deter this hateful conduct as a crime in and of itself. So $70,000 fine also from a human rights tribunal if hate speech is presented in Canada. Unbelievable.
All right, well, we have more news to get to. We're going to talk about why teenage boys particularly are sick of wokeness. So if you are a parent of a teenager, pay close attention. We'd like to hear what your experiences are as well. So are you ready for that?
Giddy up. Let's do it.
Click your knuckles. Okay. Teenagers have had enough of the woke agenda. Data shows that these young people, particularly young boys, are skewing more conservative, and liberal parents are freaking out and wondering, what did I do wrong? They're trying so hard to tell these young men about their privilege and their toxic toxic masculinity.
Toxic
masculinity. No, I'm not. Let me take a breath on that.
She can't even say it. She loves it so much.
Yeah, it's a wonder no one wants to hear about that because I cannot even pronounce it. So do you wonder why? Now, this comes from a recent article that appeared in New York Magazine. It says, "Can parents prevent their sons from sliding to the right?" The title alone is problematic. Is it good parenting to have a rigid set of beliefs that your children must adhere to? There's like entire buckets full.
Can we prevent our children from becoming conservative? Can we prevent our children from not being climate alarmists? How do we stop them from that?
Literally every young adult novel is about how children want to break free of their parents' ideology and think for themselves. Right? Every book about adolescence is about that and how we cannot impose ourselves on our children as parents any more than, I don't know. I mean, your child is not your possession to dictate what they say and believe. But that is what this person would have us believe. This is apparently this mom's goal because she says her sons are becoming oppressors right before her eyes. We're going to show you how. This is by columnist Catherine Jaser Morton. And what is it that's so upsetting to her? Well, she says, I've always tried to raise my sons in the spirit of loving gender agnosticism, if not neutrality, or of honoring their passion while honoring their passion for trucks in the NFL. Like, they're boys, but I also want them to be respectful of gender neutrality. Okay, let's leave that because it's problematic enough. She said, "We had a good, gentle run, but now my elder son is becoming conversant in such signs as sigmas and looks maxing. And whatever my best intentions are, my husband and Gray and I need to be recalibrated with a new set of much more challenging identity-defining conditions." So I had to look up what these things are that she was so upset about her sons adopting. Sigmas. Do you know this one, boys?
I'd never heard of it.
Okay.
I mean, I know alpha male, and I know
I've heard of it,
soy
but
boys.
I don't really care what it is.
Like alpha males, like a strong male. I know, and with so many beta males right now, and like so many liberal beta males. And there's so many. I know the term soy boys. Right?
No.
But never heard of. I haven't heard this Sigma male thing.
I use Sigma camera lenses. That's what I'm using right now. So maybe does that make me a Sigma male since I'm a?
No. Okay, the picture that we just showed you is a typical Sigma male. It's a guy who's popular, successful, highly independent, and self-reliant, like John Wick.
Okay.
Looking in the mirror.
Right.
Well, is that so toxic? What about that do you not want for your child? Popular, successful, highly independent, and self-reliant. No. You need to be a
unpopular,
loser,
live in your parents' house,
hate yourself, and told that you have constant mental illness. Now let's move on to looks maxing, because this is what she said is also very toxic, and she wishes that her son had nothing to do with it. That means that you're a young boy who tries to look better. Now think about it. If you're, it's so toxic. If you're a parent, this video went viral explaining looks maxing. See if you would really be upset if your son was into this.
This is what all models do to look so much better than the average person. And the funny thing is my model friends have actually told me that they're told to gatekeep this information. They don't want average people knowing this because it's going to make them look significantly better. And it's pretty ironic because it's trending all over TikTok right now and it's called looks maxing. For example, if you see comments on a video where it says like, he has a negative canthal tilt, it's over, that's a really niche topic in looks maxing and they made it into a joke. But yeah, the word is getting out and there's so much information, so what I'm doing in this video is I'm dumbing it down to 4 things that if you do these things, you're gonna look significantly better than you do right now. Number 1 is maxing out your hair. This includes the hair on your head, your eyebrows, and your facial hair. So if you're a guy, you need to start doing what girls do.
I wouldn't have a problem with that.
So toxic?
Are you saying you think it is?
No.
I don't think the adding rosemary to your eyebrows thing. Like, I would be like, if my son was like, "Daddy, I want to get some rosemary," I'd be like, no, we're not doing that.
Why not? I have some in the bathroom right now. If my son said, "Can I use this so my eyelashes look better?" it would not bother me.
All right, maybe. I don't know. I would say wash your face. I'd be down with that. Wash your face. Work out. Lower your body fat percentage if you're fat. Take care of yourself. Comb your hair.
It's literally a young kid just discovering health and wellness.
Yeah.
Is that so toxic that liberals cannot have it?
No, they can't handle it. No, I'm fine with it. I guess the rosemary thing, but I'm fine with it. Absolutely, 100%. I cared what I looked like. What? I don't want my son rubbing rosemary juice.
Rosemary oil is very healthy for hair. There's literally nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
Go ahead.
The thing that's wrong with it is he's all of that and white. So that's
a problem. Well, you can't change that.
And he's shirtless in a laundry room. It's like, is there no clean clothes? You can't put on a shirt. But okay, he's a teenage
you can't
boy.
show off your pecs with a shirt on.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, good point.
What girls are going to like his video?
I think what they're saying is, she's saying, I don't want my son to be into this, which means they don't want independent, good-looking kids. I don't want a Sigma or a look maxer. I want them then to be fat and ugly, and we have to speak for their right to take up space in the world.
And not independent.
And not independent.
Not going out and getting a job, living off mom and dad, living in our basement.
Yeah, sounds like I'd like to meet this young man, ask him some questions. Now, the author of this piece says that raising young boys, they're probably drawn to conservative values because they're entitled. Here she links to a story by a piece by Dr. Robert James, who says that the central move towards conservatism among young men is a sense that they are the aggrieved party and they're being robbed of entitlements. And that's why they might, she's totally discounting that they have anything at all. She says, in today's world, which borrows from the free market economy, success isn't figured in terms of doing steady business. It means going viral, experiencing a crazy run of success, and earning a windfall. I don't understand how these things connect. Like, you're an aggrieved party, but there's market forces. That's not a point. Like, they're too conjunct, like, they don't mesh. She says that even though white men feel like they can't say or do anything right, with presumably her son is a white male, the cancel culture isn't real, which means she knows there's a reality, but it's not their reality. It's not real. She explains this from her perspective as a humanities college professor, which her husband is too. She says many of these young men seem anxious about saying the wrong thing and often refuse to participate, sometimes projecting a provocative kind of defensiveness that is their own argument. As much as I think the cancel culture is a fake problem in media, girl, really? It feels very real to young men when they're sitting in the classroom. But she says, don't worry, because I'm going to keep trying to influence them. She says, I suspect progressive-leaning white parents' own anxiety about our reputations plays a part in our conversation with our teenage son, and they can feel it. As in, if I raise a conservative, I'm screwed. That's going to make me look bad. She says teenagers are more attuned to vanity and artifice than any other species. So try to hide your own at your own peril. When my voice raises and I start lecturing a teen about why he needs to recognize the importance of the history of indigenous people, rather than simply appropriate all the slang he's learned from Reservoir Dogs, he clocks that, and I wonder what makes him think.
First of all, she said the movie is Reservoir Dogs. She wrote Reservation Dogs.
Yes. Okay.
No, that's a TV show.
Oh, is it?
No, it's a TV show.
Oh,
yeah,
I thought she was referring to the... Okay.
No.
Oh,
Yeah, so
I
it was a
said it
TV
wrong.
show.
It's me that said it wrong.
You said
not
Reservoir
her.
Dogs. Yep.
Yeah, sorry. Anyway, sounds super fun to be lectured by your mom about your own privilege and recognizing indigenous people. It's just no wonder that teenage boy is not picking up what she's putting down, right?
Can you imagine being a teenage boy in that household, like with this mom?
No, it's hard enough to connect to my own teenage son. I realize that I use a lot of our time together, and I'm like, don't lecture him about anything. Just hang out with him, ask him questions about his day, right? You cannot constantly be coming for him, but also she just flatly dismisses the possibility that boys could be reacting to some legitimate concerns. The New York Post critiqued this article today, and they point out that rather than open her mind to the possibility that her boys and other young men like them might have legitimate disagreements with her worldview, she chalks their concerns up to an irrational victim mindset. And it's almost as if she would do better if she had daughters. Like, girls I probably could influence, but these boys, That's in the end, she says she's just going to try and be patient as she continues to try to raise liberal kids. I did recently have a friend tell me, and this is not a conservative or liberal friend, someone who's very much in the middle. And she said her teenage boy, who's a freshman in high school, he likes to rail a lot against woke liberals. It's just, and she's like, I don't know where he's getting this. I don't talk like this at home, but he hates woke liberals. And where does that come from? So it does seem like this is something that young boys are latching on to. It's not a white boy that she's talking about. And we wonder if there's something there and whether or not there's something for us to learn as the parents rather than just like pushing something on them.
Well, I think the media, absolutely. I think a lot of these young boys are seeing media that has really led them astray. They're sick and tired of seeing like Disney crap. What happened to their Star Wars going woke. Their other programs that they would watch suddenly filled with, the Marvel She universe or whatever,
right.
The NCU. You're seeing, of course, like Nerdrotic and The Critical Drinker on social media, on YouTube, and those channels, of course, have dramatically influenced. I think when they're showing up on YouTube and they're seeing these search terms and they're seeing their content that has, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like totally anti-woke, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a huge piece of this. I have a friend, incidentally, who's just hanging out with his nephew, who's like 15 years old, and he said his 15-year-old nephew is like totally anti-woke. He can't stand it. He and all of his friends can't stand it. They can't stand the wokeness. They're sick of being lectured by liberals. And he's like, I was stunned by this, to hear that he and his circle of young friends, 15-year-olds, are just sick of it.
Yeah, and of course, kids don't want to be told how to behave, and they don't like that liberals tell other people how to behave. In fact, middle-aged people don't like that either. That's my experience.
Yeah.
So, maybe this is some sort of cultural rebelliousness. Is it just young people being rebellious in the same way that sort of liberals were rebelling against conservative values? Now we just have this switch. Or I don't know, if you're a teenager, maybe you could tell us what you think it's all about. Because we're not teenagers. We also, in our house, are trying to understand teenagers all the time. It is confounding.
It's a 24-hour-a-day job.
Yes.
Any tips for us? Even Grover, you can hear Grover. He's upset about it too, our dog.
I don't understand him either.
I try to understand him. Just don't understand. It's quiet and he suddenly decides to bark.
Well, that's going to do it for us here today at Redacted. That does it for our live shows this week. Thank you so much for joining us. We will continue to have content for you throughout the weekend, so stay tuned to Redacted, share it with your friends, and also come back next Monday. We will be here 4 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for a great week, everybody.